Hi, my name is Tia Quin, and I'm an evolutionary astrologer. I live in Port Townsend, Washington, and I'm a student of Kaypacha, and who is a student of Jeffrey Wolf Green. And today I'm going to be talking about Uranus ingressing into Taurus and what that'll mean for us individually and collectively for the next 8 years. And the title of my talk is called Sprouting Liberation. A lot of the things I'm going to talk about are related to farming and some of the unsustainable farming practices that are going on, and some of the very sustainable farming practices that are going on that will be leading us into the future. I'm going to start with kind of explaining a little bit about Uranus as a planet and the sign Taurus and how those combined, how they work with each other, and what we're going to be encountering with that. And then a little bit about the history of Uranus and Taurus and its last transit through Taurus 84 years ago. And I guess I'll get started with that. Let's see. So Uranus, the planet, takes about 84 years to travel around the zodiac. It spends 8 years in a sign, and the archetype of Uranus is associated with concepts of freedom from the known, liberation, innovation, awakening, experimentation, the formation of groups and collectives, change, and rebellion. The sign of Taurus is a fixed earth sign. It's the first fixed sign in the zodiac, and it's one of the 2 signs ruled by the planet Venus. The archetype of Taurus is associated with our relationship to ourselves, what it is that we value in our lives, and how we physically experience the world via our 5 basic senses, our resources, and our need for survival. This is a quote from Jeffrey Wolf Green's book on Uranus that I found about Uranus and Taurus. The essential archetype of Uranus and Taurus correlates to, in the consciousness, the instinct to survive, to establish the foundation which life in the individual consciousness that microcosmically reflect the totality of life that can survive. And so, let's see. Can't really see this. Uranus has been in the sign of Aries for the past 8 years and will ingress Taurus on May 15th, 2018. It'll retrograde on August 7th back in the sign of Aries, and on November 6th, pardon me. I'm sorry, I'm so nervous. It's my first time doing this. And it'll re-enter Taurus on March 7th, 2019 and remain in the Earth sign until July 8th, 2025. And I set up the Sabian symbol for Uranus entering the sign of Taurus, and the symbol is a clear mountain stream, and the keynote being the pure, uncontained, and spontaneous manifestation of one's own nature. And I feel it's like a really powerful symbol for this, because it's like everyone, while Uranus was in Aries, you're kind of like figuring out, what does it mean to be a self in relation to this huge group of humans that we're all a part of. And then for Taurus, it's like, what is my true nature and who am I? And like, what are my values in relation to the collective? And what do I really want to be forming in this world and creating? And how do I want to engage with that? And I picked out a clip from a song that I think really ties into this symbol. I'll play it for you guys real quick. It's in our nature. It's in our nature. It's in our nature. It's in our nature. But now, yes, Lord. It's at home. Get home. Open up. Let's see. Switch to the next one. So Uranus was lost in Taurus during the years of 1934 and till 1941. And during those times, we went through quite a bit of tumultuous happenings. And the first one being was World War II started mid-transit. And it's one of the most devastating occurrences that ever happened in the world. Involved more than 30 countries and was the deadliest war in human history, taking more than 80 million lives. You know, this war was really about like, you know, kind of a war of values, and it's like, you know, we have people that really didn't value human life and people standing up for that and rebelling against that. And one thing that happened during that I thought was very Uranus and Taurus was that in response to food rationing that was happening during the war, there were victory gardens that were created, and people all over America were like urged and encouraged to grow their own food and garden as a response to the lack of resources they had, you know, things like milk, butter, you know, lots of things were rationed out. And so I thought it was really cool that, you know, over 20 million Americans got engaged with this process and started growing their own food, and were actually able to meet the same amount of food as that was commercially farmed in those years. And it kind of sucks because after the war was over, you know, they just went back to grocery shopping, and a lot of the gardens just fell out of use and weren't replanted the following years. But I think this is definitely a good example of something that could be woken up without such conflict. And, you know, it doesn't take a war to, you know, I don't think it should have to take a war for us to have the initiative to go out there and grow our own food. And, you know, so yeah, I thought that was interesting. Another thing that happened during that time period was the first of the modern chemical pesticides, DDT, was created. And it was initially used in the war to combat malaria, and afterwards was brought back, and everyone was so excited, I'm not going to have bugs in my garden, and, you know, started using it in copious amounts. And you know, it was eventually banned in the 80s, but it took a long while for them to recognize that the impacts of, you know, this invention and its effect on the earth and wildlife and the environment. And since then, it's, you know, it's only increased. There's only more pesticides in use. So I feel like, you know, Uranus being the sign of inventions and creations, like there's sometimes when, you know, like it seems like things that we don't really know about are being like tested out and put to use without like thinking of the future implications of that use. And I have this little image here that was one of the propaganda images that DDT is good for me, and yeah, it certainly was not. Reload. So I'm missing one of the images. On a positive note, the last time that Uranus was in Taurus, we also saw the formation of two of the major nature conservation groups in the US, with the Wilderness Society forming. And that eventually led to the protection of over 110 million public lands, with like national forests and wildlife refuge. Little image for the Fish and Wildlife didn't update, but yeah, then the Fish and Wildlife Service formed soon after that, in 1940, and it's dedicated to the conservation of fish and natural life and habitats, and they work with endangered species and wildlife refuges. So I thought that was like one of the most positive manifestations of the transit. Let's see. So another quote here, it's, Uranus is like the planet that, we're waking up to like what our future could be. But first we need to let go of parts of the past that are inhibiting our future growth. And there's another quote from Jeff Green's book. And it says, before we can move into our future, we have to be free from our past to the extent that the past inhibits or blocks the future from being fully realized. And let's see. So let's see. So this 8-year transit is going to bring about situations where it's necessary for us to liberate ourselves from our over-reliance on external resources to provide our basic needs for survival. And, whether that's you completely rely on going to the Safeway for all of your food, and then, something happens, the Safeway's closed, you have no food. Whether it's, you're relying on the government to give you money, or so I think that this transit's really going to be promoting, all of us to wake up to the idea that we can be doing more to provide for ourselves and not really looking for external sources for that to happen. Let's see. In order to accomplish this, there are a lot of outdated value systems that are no longer in alignment with us as individuals and collective. And it's about taking a really good look at where you are in the world and where the world is. And it's like, am I really lined up with this or not? And thinking for yourself and finding ways to grow. Let's see. So we accomplish this by rebelling against the misuse of resources and the continuation of unsustainable practices. And this is specifically in relation to the earth and how land is used. So this transit of Taurus is going to be activating our survival instincts and will bring about earth changes that absolutely require our adaptation and our physical participation to survive. So one of the things going on right now that's evolved from that time is commercial farming and how that affects our world. Oh, wait. How do I go back? Let's see. Oh. Sorry. I'm really bad at this. Oh my God. Oh, I'm having troubles. Okay. So Hey, Linda.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so my slides are acting up, so I'm just going to do this face-to-face with you guys. So something that's evolved from that time, the last time that Uranus was in Taurus, is commercial farming has become, increasingly popular. And, I put the thing about the DDT being created during the last Uranus cycle. And at this point, about 6 billion tons of pesticides are used worldwide every year. And that's pretty concerning. And as a farmer myself, I've managed farms in Hawaii for a couple years, and they were biodynamic organic farming, so this subject is really near and dear to me. And one thing that happened a couple years ago, I was living with my grandmother, who was born during this time when Uranus was last in Taurus. And I started this huge organic garden at her house. And I go out into the yard one day, and there's just chemical pesticide, slow release fertilizer all over the garden that I just spent so much time making organic. And then I went around the house and I found, a 55-gallon worth of pesticides just on her front shelf. And it was really hurtful. We got in a big argument about it because I feel like that whole generation, they don't even necessarily understand, or they didn't understand the effects and the long-term effects that these chemicals have on our environment and the earth. And, commercial farms, they heavily rely on the use of pesticides and herbicides. They do monocultures, so it's just they're growing one kind of crop, and that's all they grow for hundreds and hundreds of acres. And what this does is it will, eventually completely deplete the soil of nutrients by, the over application of these chemicals in combination with not using crop rotation. And, this is something that leads to deserts and, not to the health of our environment. So organic farming is quite the opposite, but, it's just a budding movement. And in comparison, organic farms make up just a small amount of the farms that we have around the world. Organic farms aren't using genetically modified seeds. They use heirloom seeds that are passed down through the generations. They use techniques like composting and, plant plants that actually put nutrients back in the soil, such as like for instance, like clover will put nitrogen into the soil, or you have plants like comfrey that are going deep with their roots and digging up nutrients and bringing them to the surface for other plants to enjoy. They're also not tilling the land and disturbing the soil in a way that nutrients would be depleted. And using permaculture practices, you're planting things that don't need to be continuously planted year after year, and that actually have, some lasting effect, and that we're able to go back year after year and, get sustenance for ourselves. Let's see. I think the next slides do work, so can I share my screen there?
Yes, go ahead.
So here I have some tips for evolving with the transit individually and what we can all do to make the most of the next 8 years. And first off, let's see, starting a home garden and growing your own food, saving your own seeds, and eating your own crops. This ensures that you're not relying on outside forces to provide you sustenance and keep you alive. One thing that I think is really powerful is sprouting, and it's so easy that you can even share it with children. All they got to do is put some sprouts in a jar and put water over it, and a couple days later you have food that's super nutritious. And let's see, spend more and more time connecting with nature. I feel like so many people get locked into, restrictive environments such as the office or jobs or whatever that keeps them from being outside and actually, putting their feet on the earth and recognizing that you're part of the world that we live on, and totally connected to nature. And the more time that you spend in nature, the happier you will be. Bringing beauty into form via the arts. So Taurus is a sign that's ruled by Venus, and it's about like creating beauty and surrounding yourself with things that are beautiful. So the more that you're using your body to create art through dance or making a beautiful painting or singing, whatever it is that you really love doing, that you can share to make the world a more beautiful place. It's something I'd recommend. And tapping into what your core values are and what really matters to you as a person versus, adopting all of the values from other people or outside sources or what anyone else is telling you what to do. Like, what really matters for you as an individual, and spend some time with the question and be prepared to change when and if necessary. Uranus is certainly going to bring about a lot of changes, and if you're kind of fixed on one way of being or one idea, that's when you get all the shocks and surprises. And so yeah, get ready to change. Don't be fixed. And at its at core level, Taurus is the sign about self-love and really loving yourself enough to do what's best for yourself, what's best for everyone else. And so I thought this quote was really beautiful. To love yourself is the greatest revolution. So evolving with the transit collectively. If the future requires, just like the Jeff Green quote said, for us to shed our past and allow for the future to unfold, we must, as a collective, let go of the failed experiments and daringly step into the new. So I feel like, each time Uranus goes into a sign, we're like testing new ideas and coming up with different things, but just because, the experiment is created doesn't necessarily mean that it's something that in the long range is going to be, is going to help us evolve, is going to help us grow. And so I feel like, if war isn't something that works for us, it's something that we need to let go of. If, poisoning the earth with pesticides and, farming unsustainably, it's something that we need to let go and start, be innovative enough to recognize that like these practices are not sustainable, and put into practice techniques that are, and that will ensure survival And Uranus is about groups and communities, so we can all be working with each other and together to form groups and communities that actually create more beauty in the world and benefit our health. I found this quote. So, a sustainable human community is designed in such a manner that its ways of life, technologies, and social institutions honor and support and cooperate with nature's inherent ability to sustain life. And I think that's really like the core of what this transit is going to bring about in the most positive way, is that we can all wake up and connect with each other in ways and be creative enough to invent ways that we're all loving each other and loving the earth and not destroying it. And then, so the Sabian symbol for Uranus exiting Taurus in 2025 was a peacock parading on the terrace of an old castle. And the keynote is a personal display of inherited gifts. And so all of us, have talents, and we all have a capacity to share those talents. And so during the course of this transit, I think that a lot of talents that you might have been holding back or, sleeping on are going to be roused and put to use. And so I think that letting these shifts and changes that Uranus instigates bring you a place to doing more of what you love and find a way to contribute to the health and survival of our planet. So let's see, stop sharing the screen. So yeah, I'm kind of thrown off by this PowerPoint life and this whole process here. It's something that's like made me slightly out of balance myself, but I guess, do we have any questions so far? Or yes, yeah, I don't know.
Okay, we're back to the gallery view. So do we have any questions from the audience or comments? I just wanted to give you encouragement. This was a beautiful presentation, and I agree with just about everything that you said. I wanted to make a comment as far as maybe the reevaluation of the foundation of the soil. Because it seems like, that has been so overlooked, but with a non, what's the word I'm looking for? With a bad foundation, you're not going to have, good plants to, good soil. Your plants are only as good as the soil.
Yeah, that's certainly true. Like I had an experience. I think I was in Detroit, but kind of on the border of, in like a farmlands or whatever. And I saw this like field, and it had just been harvested, and the whole thing was just dusty. It looked like a desert. There was dust blowing in the wind. It didn't look like, when you go into the forest and you take up some moss, it didn't look like that deep, rich soil that actually sustains life. And when you look at, a forest, for instance, it's amazing how dark and rich the soil is and how everything really naturally takes care of itself. And, it doesn't need outside influences. It doesn't need all of these chemicals to promote growth. It just grows, with, the basics like sunlight, water, rain, leaves dropping, and composting on the ground. Animals go around and add their little poop to the mix, and, you get beautiful plants from that. And yeah, I think that's definitely something that really needs to be looked at, especially when commercial farms take up, you know, a majority of the land. And I was looking at Monsanto's site, and I've never really looked at Monsanto's site before. And it was so crazy the way that they would kind of twist words to say, like, you know, like, this style of farming is actually good for us because we're being like innovative, and organic farming takes up too much land to be sustainable. And yeah, I thought that was totally ridiculous. So yeah, that's definitely a great point. Thank you.
Yes, hello. I was also thinking about the disappearing farmland. Like, I mean, what do you think is going to happen with Uranus moving in Taurus for
the disappearing farmland, as in like once the soils have been depleted, and then what happens? Or
well, it's because the city get bigger and bigger, and they use the farmland to build a larger city. So that's why the farmland are disappearing.
well, I think well, there are a few ways to answer that. And I feel like people in the city, you know, you don't need to have, you know, a farm to grow your own food. And so one of the examples I used was the victory gardens that happened during Uranus's last transit. And a majority of those were located in cities and not on actual farms. Like, I think something like 15 million of those gardens were in cities. And this is something that, you know, generated suburbs afterwards. But so I think it's not leaving the city necessarily to go off the grid and everyone goes off the grid and creates an organic farm. It's about, you know, bringing that energy into these massive cities so that, you know, if everything went haywire, you know, you have a balcony garden, or, you know, you're utilizing the space. Like, you know, you could be growing on rooftops or creating community gardens in unused land. There's plenty of, you know, just plots of land that are fenced up with weeds in them that could be growing food. As for the farmlands that have been depleted and are being used as these commercial farms, I think that they really need to be converted. And so maybe like by taking these hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of acres that have been misused, I mean, it's going to take a while and a lot of energy and inputs to build them up again. But I'd say one good book to read about that would be there's this Japanese natural farmer, what's his name, Masanobu Fukuoka, and he wrote the One Straw Revolution, and one of his more recent books was Sowing Seeds in the Desert. And it's like, how do you sow seeds in land that, you know, doesn't have that soil fertility, and, you know, coming up with ways to work with land that's been abused. And so I think that that needs to happen. And then additionally, you know, people who are very interested in farming need to go out there and actually, you know, engage with it and create these gardens also. Does that answer your question?
Yes, yes, thank you. But I was thinking, you know, there is a lot of young people that would like to go back in farming, but now the farms are so large, and I don't know if it's the same in United States, but here in Canada, we have some law that prohibit, you know, like the division of a farmland. So that, I was also thinking, Uranus in Taurus, do you think that there is a future in the technology, like those farming on the roof of building, or having some building that are used for mostly aquaculture, and they do like, I think there is some experimentation like that is happening. Is it in Chicago?
Yeah, like Definitely. And, you know, like you can perform these little experiments, you know, everyone can perform these experiments, you know, themselves. Like it's really easy to, you know, like I said, do the simplest thing, just, you know, add some water with some sprout seeds and 3 days later you have sprouts. Or, you know, create these rooftop gardens and whatnot. Um, there are also things that I don't know. I personally have been experimenting with, like it's called forest gardening, and so you look at nature for an example, and like how does nature work? It works in like several different layers. So in a forest garden, you would be mimicking nature in a way that you have the canopy trees, and then below that there are the shrubs, and below that, you know, you have you know, the vines going up and the ground covers, and all of these things work together to create, you know, a mini ecosystem. So instead of planting, you know, rows and rows of corn, you are actually, you know, more in alignment with nature when you're mixing crops together and using permaculture techniques to line up with what nature's doing. So.
Very interesting. Do you have many planets in Taurus?
I don't. My Pluto polarity point's in Taurus, though.
That's huge.
And I don't know. I have definitely a Uranus moon conjunction. But yeah, so I think that is part of you know, my personal mission is to I don't know, for a few years when I was managing a farm, I taught organic farming, and I had a website on WOOF, the Worldwide Organic Farms, and so I'd have different people. I was living in Hawaii at the time, and I had all kinds of youth coming from all over the country to learn farming. And it was so astonishing to me that, like, the lack of knowledge of where food comes from and how it grows. Because I had, you know, a majority of the people that came and learned farming from me were between the ages of 18 and 24. And we'd go into the greenhouse and they'd ask, "What plant is that?" "It's a tomato." You go down, "What plant is that?" "That's a tomato also." They're all tomatoes. Those are all tomatoes. Like, and they have, you know, no recognition of, you know, basic foods that they probably go to the grocery store every day and buy, but there's a complete disconnect with, you know, what it actually is. So I think that would be it's a great way to get engaged with farming if you don't know anything about it. There are plenty of farms that, you know, need seasonal help, and, you know, and then additionally, you know, there's the community gardens that are local that you can get engaged with and have a little 4x6 plot and really get into it that way.
Yeah, Tashi, go ahead.
Hi, I'm sorry, I'm a little under the weather, so I sound odd and I look worse. Tia, thank you so much. I love this idea. And I was watching something, I don't know where it was, but I saw that scientists have figured out how to break down plastic. And they're going to be able to clean it all up. And they said they can now break it down in a week, but they're trying to break it down in a few hours, and they think they're going to get there. And I thought, oh, Uranus and Taurus. Would you agree?
Definitely. And it's something that's not only affecting, you know, the land, but it's also affecting our oceans in a pretty terrible way. I was just reading something about, like, all of our shellfish and how many microplastics are contained inside of them. And it's certainly something that needs to be cleaned up. And, you know, it's something that has to be done, you know, if we want to live on a healthy planet that's not littered, you know, completely littered. You know, in my travels, you know, I traveled all through Central America and, you know, Asia, and you just see plastic water bottles and plastic crap everywhere in the rivers and the forest, just thrown on the side of the road. And it's, you know, truly awful. So an invention like that would definitely, I think, help and be something that hopefully this Uranus and Taurus transit brings about for us.
Tia,
Yeah.
it's Angela.
Hi, Angela.
Of course I'm watching you. But I had a question for you as far as the collective and re-education and, you know, having to, I would say, heal the land that's commercially farmed right now.
Mhm.
So wouldn't that be more of like, okay, so we have this 8-year transit. So in that 8-year transit, you're saying that things are going to be shaken up and don't be fixed. Let's help move this collective forward, this effort forward. So my question to you is, in this 8-year transit, stop laughing.
Yeah, where are you? Turn your camera down, girl.
In this 8-year transit, do you think that we can do those reversals that we need to make in order to move this forward the way that we need to? Or is that going to take longer than 8 years? Is this just going to be a catalyst to help the process begin?
I think it's more definitely a catalyst and kind of activating the need for these transformations to happen in order for our Earth to be happy and, you know, healthy. You know, you can see from like Uranus and Taurus in history, like between now and then, you know, we've had all these advancements, but were any of these advancements really for, you know, the health of the planet and to our benefit? Seems like a lot of those changes that were implemented in actually ended up poisoning the earth instead of, you know,
sustaining,
improving it. So I'd say that the transit is gonna, you know, probably, I don't know, it was interesting that the World War, it took a world war to have people making their own gardens. Like they didn't start gardens of their own volition. They had, you know, they were like, oh, well, I don't have any butter today. I better go out there and milk a cow and make some butter, you know, like, so I think sometimes it kind of takes like a lack of resources or like something is taken away from you to have the initiative to do this. So it's like pretty unfortunate that, you know, we got to learn the lessons the hard way, you know, so hopefully, you know, it takes people that are of, you know, the individuated state of consciousness and like higher states of consciousness to, you know, put that energy out there in order to change the collective views. So it's like the more people that get out there and start using, you know, these organic practices and, you know, experimenting with different ways to work with the earth that do promote environmental health and, you know, expand upon that idea so that, you know, a whole Uranus cycle from now, you know, we're looking at a different picture where, you know, we've actually improved upon things instead of, you know,
made it worse.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, any final questions or comments?
I had another thought too. Maybe this Uranus and Taurus will activate the food not lawns movement that started, you know, quite a while back, because there seems to be so much, you know, people placing the, you know, if you have a garden, even sometimes in people's backyards, let alone the front yards, and I was like, oh, it's going to take down my property values. You know, well, you can't eat, you know, your property values. So maybe Uranus and Taurus will.
Well, and then a lot of those lawns come with, you know, chemicals. You know, you don't get a lawn without weeds in it and, you know, without spraying it continuously that goes into the drains and eventually goes into the ocean. So, yeah, I definitely think that, yeah, we should tear our lawns up. You know, it's totally cool to have a little patch of grass somewhere where you can sit and hang out, and it's awesome to me. I even just planted some grass the other day in my yard, but in a very small patch of the yard. It's not taking up huge areas that could be growing food, you know, yeah, my landlord for my property, he was, you know, concerned about this bush getting cut and that bush getting cut, and he didn't have anything edible on his property except for some scraggly native blackberry bushes with, you know, a little bit of blackberries, some grass, and you know, salal, which and a couple tiny bushes. So it's like that kind of way of managing your property isn't going to feed you if you want to survive. So hopefully it doesn't take, you know, resources being taken from us or rationed from us in order for us to get this movement alive and going again. And hopefully people get rid of those lawns, put some vegetables there.
Yeah, Tia, I've been a biodynamic gardener for 30 years, and it really is a good way to make money if you want to, you know, survive that way. And I really enjoyed it. I just want to share a little photo of me in the garden. So there we are, growing lettuce. Lettuce, yeah, seedlings at the top there, all sorts of seedlings, and at the bottom I grew 60 varieties of lettuce and 60 varieties of salad greens, and it was a beautiful product, and I enjoyed doing that so much. Okay, any final questions? We have about 4 minutes left.
I also wanted to throw out real quickly too, a lot of stuff can be grown. I've been experimenting with container gardening, and a lot of stuff can be grown in small, even just a 5-gallon bucket. So there's stuff that can be done.
Yeah, I mean, you could, and that's something that could fit on a balcony, or, you know, if you don't really have the space, like a lot of people are just living in apartments, you know, they don't have a big yard that they can even grow a lawn on in the first place. So yeah, container gardening, microgreens, there's all sorts of ways on a micro scale that you can do these things. And then there's also larger ways to do things. So definitely something I hope that this transit wakes up for us. Hope that we can all sprout our own liberation.
Yeah, Tia, I would recommend that people go to the biodynamic website in their country. Do you have the biodynamics happening in the USA?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. I'm not sure of a website exactly.
Or permaculture, or
yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
One book I just read that was fantastic on permaculture was what was it called? It's like trying to remember. I'll share the link.
Yeah, sure.
I'll share the link later, but yeah, I've been reading like Farming the Woods and you know, different ways of using land that you know, works with how everything is synchronistically connected with each other. And
beautiful. And the most important thing, I think, is to learn how to make compost. And, you know, heaps of compost. Don't throw blood and bone directly down onto the soil because it disturbs the balance. So put everything into the compost. And the worms.
Bokashi composting?
No.
So bokashi composting is something that I definitely 100% recommend besides the traditional forms of composting. It's a Japanese style of composting that's more based on, it's an anaerobic style of composting. So,
yep. Yeah,
so you use effective microorganisms every time, and you can just use like a cooler, like, you know, one of those 5-gallon coolers, as long as it has a drain. And anytime you're putting compost in there, you add some bokashi, which is a brand that's been treated with effective microorganisms, and it pretty much liquefies it. And each day you go and you drain it a little bit, and you can use that as a compost tea that can be diluted up to 100 times. And once the container is full, it only requires about 2 to 3 weeks of finishing before it can be directly applied to the garden. It doesn't attract pests because it's in a closed container, and it doesn't release harmful gases for the environment.
Beautiful. Sounds great.
But I guess I'll put some links up of things that would be good for, getting people aware of different farming practices that can help us.
Well, I hope you'll come back and speak more about farming practices. We have, 8 years of this transit?
Yeah.
Yeah, plenty of time. So,
Tia, time to get my PowerPoint.
Okay, well, that brings us to the end of your meeting. Thank you very much for supplying so much great information. Thank you from all of us. See you next time.
Thank you
Bye.
for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tia.
Beautiful. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Excellent.
Thank you.